Well, joining me now is Willox, the recently appointed CEO of the Australian Industry Group, who took over from Heather Ridout. Congratulations on the job, Innes.
Thanks, Alan. It's good to be here.
Do you think that Australian manufacturing does have a future without government help? If the government doesn't do anything, is there a future for manufacturing?
Look, of course there's a future for manufacturing, but it'll be a different manufacturing industry to the one that we have now, and perhaps the one that we had 10 years ago. It will change size and scale and shape. That's inevitably going to happen. But you have a sector here that employs directly almost 1 million people. That's just not going to disappear overnight. We have some very strong competitive advantages in manufacturing, particularly around high-end value-add manufacturing. But the fact is that we're a high-cost country, and where that is felt most is in the manufacturing sector. We can't compete on cost alone, so we have to adapt and change, and that adaptation is taking place.
Now, you've been engaged in an examination of manufacturing with Dave Oliver, the head of the ACTU, and a group of unions and employers. Mm-hmm. And you're releasing your report on Thursday. But just can you talk a little about what you've learnt out of that process, and in particular, what is the common ground between the business world and the unions?
Look, as we've distilled this over a long time, over almost a year, this process, that was originally conceived as perhaps being an inquiry into the future of manufacturing, and then the government said, no, let's have a task force to look at this. So we've dug down with unions, with business and with research institutions and some key academics, Roy Green and Goran Ruz and the like, to look at the future of manufacturing. So we've done a lot of comparisons between Australia and some of our competitor countries. So what we're looking at is, where are our strengths? First strength is we're on the cusp of Asia. So we have the Asian market. That middle class is growing. How do we serve that middle class? So what are the sectors that are going to be important to serving that Asian middle class? So we're looking at food and beverages, obviously, high value add manufacturing, energy processing. Those sort of sectors are going to be the key drivers of manufacturing.
But the food manufacturing industry seems to be shutting down almost.
Well, not quite. It is changing, and it's perhaps symptomatic of what's going on in the broader industry. That sort of crash and bash manufacturing is perhaps going because we can't compete on cost unless you're very close to market. But where it is developing is in that high value add, the R&D, the processing that is going on, the export orientation. That is where the growth is. So that is.
And there is growth. Are you saying
there is growth? There is absolutely growth, and the companies involved in that sector are convinced there is growth, and they're working towards that. And then we look at other areas where the sector is very strong, and it's in our innovative capacity. We've always been a strong nation in terms of innovation and R&D. We perhaps haven't developed the culture we've had to. So this report is really looking at how we can develop that R&D, that innovation culture within Australia, going back through our education system, going into collaboration between businesses and research institutions and universities, the notion of clustering to develop ideas and to develop sort of cohesive frameworks that industry can take forward. All of these are going to be central. The other area is on energy policy. There's big debate within Australia about energy policy, about the notion of reservation or not. What we're saying is really we need to have a look at this. Because
are you in favour of it?
We're just saying we need to look at it to see what the pros and cons are. At the moment there hasn't been a proper debate. There is perhaps prima facie some rationale behind a reservation policy for the benefit of Australian industry, but you've got to be competitive globally. We all know that. This idea that we're just sort of shipping our resources away, not value adding, and then bringing them back at higher cost, that is a problem for industry more broadly.
It's certainly true that the rejuvenation of American manufacturing that's going on at the moment is in large part due to the lower cost of gas.
Absolutely, and we're seeing the reindustrialisation of America. We used to, as a nation, have a competitive advantage when it came to energy costs. We've lost that for a whole variety of reasons. You could go into the poles and wires argument, or the carbon tax argument, or the fact that we just don't value add our own resources. So let's have a look at this issue. Let's see what other countries are doing and how can we benefit.
Now, you were for a time the Consul General for Australia in California, which included Silicon Valley. Now, there's a lot of debate in Australia about how are we going to get a Silicon Valley in our country. It's been going on for about as long as I've been a journalist, and it never gets anywhere, goes round and round in circles. Is that a pointless exercise, or is there some way of government doing something that would generate innovation and an innovation place or culture.
One of the first points that was made to us in this discussion on the future of manufacturing and industry more broadly was that the government didn't have money. So we hear this all the time. I don't quite buy that argument myself, that bill of goods. There is money out there, it's just a matter of how you want to divert it and resource it. Do we need a Silicon Valley? We probably will never have a Silicon Valley, quite frankly, because we don't have the size or scale, we don't have the venture capital that comes into Australia that the United States have, we don't have the skill sets, we don't have the population. All these have come together to create a Silicon Valley, and they have first mover advantage really when it comes to developing a Silicon Valley. We look at other countries, perhaps like Israel is the classic example, who have developed an innovative culture. And how have they done that? They've imbued it in their school system, they imbue it in all parts of their society, they patent much more than Australia. We hear this all the time. So how do we develop a culture like that? This is where the notion of clustering and hubbing comes in. We're not going to be a Silicon Valley, we should perhaps not aspire to be one, but we can take the best of the ideas that have gone behind that to develop our own culture.
You said something in one of the sessions today which I was amazed at. The return, you said, on venture capital is minus 12%.
Yes.
So wonder there's no venture capital in this country.
Exactly.
Everyone's losing money.
That people are losing money.
So why is it minus 12%? What's going on?
Because we don't have the scale, we don't have the size. I sit on the board of Innovation Australia, and one of the most desultory tasks I have every month is to tick and flick on projects that we've given seed funding to that then can't develop or gain finance for the next stage of development. And they are bought out overseas. We have them in from Germany.
What do you mean tick and flick?
Well, basically it comes before us. They've tried to find the finance within Australia. They can't find it. They've found finance overseas, so we just have to let it go. These great ideas. It happens monthly and it's depressing, it's soul destroying, because we don't have that capital within Australia.
We've got a massive superannuation
Well, the question
pool.
I have, and I was about to raise that, is that because we have this massive superannuation fund, is that an inhibitor to venture capital within Australia, the development of venture capital? Because superannuation funds, we have to fund our ageing population, they need a rate of return. Does that mean we're risk averse when it comes to investment? Would people whose pensions are going into superannuation funds be happy to invest in a fairly risky or a more risky venture capital?
Also, you were in California. Where does the venture capital come from? It doesn't obviously come from pension funds. It comes from individuals.
It comes from individuals, wealthy individuals who are prepared to seed fund, and we don't have that here. When I ask the question, I'm told that within Australia you really need a VC fund to work of about $130 million. So you can fund about 10 projects and have some money left over, 10 million, 10 by 10. There aren't many individuals within Australia who have that sort of capital, who are prepared to invest it within venture capital realm within Australia. So how do you attract that capital in from overseas, from America? From the UK, from Europe more broadly. So
but that's not the point. I mean, everyone's going to America to get the capital because that's where they live.
Exactly. So
it's fair enough.
It's fair enough, exactly. But you have to attract some of that down here. I mean, to start up the venture capital industry, and that's really a major challenge for the country.
Do you think the Fair Work Act and Fair Work Australia has damaged Australian productivity, and it therefore needs to be changed in order to improve productivity?
The Fair Work Act's been in place now for just over 2 years. Every part of evidence we find, whether it be factual or anecdotal, points to the fact that the Fair Work Act has restricted productivity growth within Australia, which has flatlined over the past decade. So it's not just the Fair Work Act that it's play, but it's a factor. And business tells us that union rights have increased right across the board. We've seen restrictions on what business can do, how they can manage their companies. We've had the Fair Work Review, had 53 recommendations. We've gone through this in detail. There are 24 that are for us broadly not negotiable, particularly around increases in union rights.
You mean you're against them?
Yeah, we're against them, totally against them, because they are productivity blockers. And that's what we need, is to improve our productivity. So where are we at? We have things like greenfield sites, which the Fair Review panel has recommended that companies now have to go to compulsory arbitration to resolve disputes with unions over wage rates and those sort of issues.
So what you're saying is not only has the Fair Work Act made productivity worse, it's going to get worse because the review has recommendations that make it worse.
If the review's recommendations are adopted by the government, it will only worsen the situation, and that's what we're arguing very strongly, that the shackles need to be loosened for investment, for productivity growth, and most importantly for jobs growth within Australia.
And what do you think of what the Coalition's saying on this subject?
Coalition is working its way sort of tortoise-like towards a policy approach. They're a little bit gun-shy given their history, we all understand that, but there are some signs that they are moving, particularly around individual flexibility agreements, particularly in terms of loosening the shackles on small business, in terms of unfair dismissal rights and the like. It's an ongoing discussion. They are actively seeking industry views. I'm sure before we get to the next election, they'll have a pretty clear and coherent policy.
But do you think that Bill Shorten understands the issue, but is just simply hog-tied by the unions?
Look, the unions are deeply unhappy about what this review has come up with. That's very clear. And the minister's got to try and navigate his way through this. We've also got to remember from the government's perspective, this legislation was drafted by the Prime Minister now, so they're going to be very reluctant to make significant changes. The government believes the Act has operated appropriately. Industry says it isn't. This is an ongoing discussion and it's one that we're going to have for many years to come.
Thanks very much for joining us, Alex.
Thanks, Alan.